Well, we are recording. So, hi, cheers to you, sir. A trans-Pacific, many time zones. You're like 6,000. I don't know what it is, like Friday for you, and it's like 2019 for me, I think. So, something
You're in the
to that
future,
effect.
man.
You are significantly so.
Yeah.
I'm not even born yet in your timeline.
Yeah, and unfortunately in mine, COVID is still not over. So,
I suppose my pre-birth state might be preferable then. We'll have to see. That's a very cynical take. Not my normal, but I don't know. You led me there.
Hey, well, I mean, at least prices would be cheaper for you.
That's true. Got mid-80s. Yeah. Not bad.
Yeah. No 4K just yet.
Well, with that as our spectacular leaping off point, I suppose, since I don't quite know the nature of who will be watching this later, it would be due diligence to offer a word or two on, who you are, what you do. I'll do the same, but I'll let you kick it off. I know that there will be probably a bio on the site, but let's pretend that they ignored that and just in their enthusiasm, they clicked so fast to watch this video that there was no time to read bios. So,
well, why read the typos when you can just hear them?
Love it.
Perfect. Yeah. I guess, actually, I just realized I don't know even how to introduce, because it's like we're having a chat at the same time. It's like I don't want to be like, hi, hello, my name is Kim, but at the same time, it's like that's kind of what. So
well, here, tell you what, I can spoon feed it to you a little bit, because you are a very unique figure in this global community of composers, in the way that you've obviously done some great work in games, not least of which for my lovely, wonderful friend Ken Wong on the BAFTA-nominated Florence. And so obviously, you've got pedigree in games, but also, above all, you are a fixture of the anime world, which is a very unusual position for essentially any non-Japanese composer. There's very few that I'm aware of. This is where you may disabuse me of my ignorance, but it seems like the overwhelming majority are, of course, Japanese, unsurprisingly. And so I guess with that seed planted, I genuinely don't know the answer to this. I'm sorry that this almost sounds like now I'm interviewing you, but I don't know how you found your way into that world. And your work there is just superb. I mean, really, really stands apart. And every time Mason Lieberman sends me the latest, I'm always like, listening for a few seconds going, the guy's obviously, knows what he's doing. He can handle himself. And then another few seconds go by and I'm like, oh, I didn't see that coming. And another few seconds, oh, wow, I really like that. And off it goes. So for my sake and for the bonus of anybody else watching, how did that happen? How did you find your way into that niche, even though it's a massive industry?
Well, that's very, very kind of you to say. I'll just say also, just off the bat, of course, a huge, genuine fan of yourself as well for many years, and I really appreciate the soundtracks that you do, because they're not just inspiring for myself personally, but it also gives me something to study, which is really nice. And it also gives me a lot of questions to ask about how the fuck did you do that? So any preparation that I've done for this is basically so how did you do that? Or how did you get from there to there without...
That's very kind, but you're deflecting, sir. You are dodging. This is basically like the nice version of a political debate where it's like, well, before I answer, I just want to thank all of you for coming here today. And I just want to say we can all agree that, exactly. Prices are too high. And I've run out of time.
Yeah, exactly. I never made my point. But so anime in particular, I started off before being passionate about anime, being passionate about games. That was what I did as a kid. So I was obsessed with. It's what I skipped school for.
Grew up in Melbourne. Like, are you from Melbourne? Are you?
No, I live in Melbourne now. I'm from Perth, Western Australia.
Got it.
So
How far away?
it's well, from Melbourne it's about 4 hours flight. So I guess it's like
No one would
I don't know.
describe Los Angeles and New York as close together, and
Yeah, but
comparable distance.
yeah, I guess almost like just that tiny bit over, maybe like a Virginia or something like that. I guess I think that north though. Sorry, my geography of America is quite shit. But
I actually only know about. I once the Wazo in Perth played some music of mine once, and I remember I was looking up to see if there was any chance of going, and when I realized that, it's difficult to not like, because being in Los Angeles, shooting down to Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane is not actually totally unreasonable. But it was amazing how the basically adding all of Australia to then cross as well. Yeah. Really, it became impossible to make it without needing several days of layovers.
You literally lose days.
Yeah,
like,
it's
coming here.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
So yes, continue.
Perth,
forgive me. Yes.
Yeah, Perth. The reason Perth is actually the most isolated capital city on the planet. So growing up there, the joke is, first off, everybody because it's so small, and then the second joke is that you have to go anywhere to do anything, which is not necessarily true at all. But we do have Perth,
theoretically you have to leave Perth. Like it's too...
you have to go off into the sunset a little bit just to kind of broaden your horizons, so to speak. But the sweet irony to that is that Perth actually has some really great exports. Things like Tim Minchin, for example. Tim Minchin's from Perth.
I didn't know that.
Pendulum is from Perth. So we've got some great exports. But the third, I guess, stereotype is that all Australians eventually come home. So while I didn't come home to Perth, I did move to Melbourne from London, where where we met briefly originally, which is great. But to do,
although I don't know that I actually, I think I somehow didn't retain the memory that you were living in London.
It's all good. Neither do I.
so does that mean that you went there? Did you go there for university or what? Just help me.
I did. Royal College over there. That was that was the post grad. The undergrad was done in Perth, and actually, the undergrad was done in concert music and experimental art music. So while I was always quite keen to do game music, and I'll eventually answer your question, but
this is all gold, man. I love this. I mean, because honestly, it's one of those that, as I'm sure people ask you all the time, I very often get questions from people who are eyeing games or specifically game music as a career. There very often is that curiosity about, what steps must I take, as if there's a prescription. And I'm always trying to say, if you take 100 composers and ask them kind of what their path looks like, you'll get 100 wildly different answers. And you're basically just, proving that as all composers do. I mean, it's just, there is no,
it's
10 program.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, you can give someone a little bit of encouragement out the door, but you can't really teach them how to walk. So that was a shit analogy. I'm sorry. I'm going to blame the lack of caffeine on that one. But
no, it works for me.
But oh god, what were we talking about?
So you went to Royal College, experimental art music, which is fascinating.
Oh yeah, so I did did concert music or more like art music or modern music, I guess, at undergraduate in Perth. But I was always keen on doing games, or always keen on being a video game composer, because I played. I was a GameCube kid, and so I played Metroid Prime a bunch. As a kid, and that game was like my original, like, okay, I want to do that now. Game. And because Metro Prime is published and originally created by a company called Nintendo. Oh, what's Nintendo? Oh, Nintendo. Oh, it's okay from this country called Japan. Awesome. Okay, let's see. Okay, what's Japan like? Oh, Japan's really cool. I want to learn the language. Now I want to like see what other media they do. Oh, I really like anime now. So it was like that. It kind of germinated out.
Those are some pretty substantial. Those are not small steps to kind of gloss over, especially the idea of learning the language. When did you kind of begin to conscientiously tackle that?
So the thing with Australia, because of its location to Japan in terms of time zones, not latitude, but longitude, or is that the opposite? Oh God, I really suck at geography. Anyway, so
I think it would be longitude.
So a lot of people from Japan tend to come to Australia on working holiday visas. And so Perth is like one of those big hotspots for people from Japan to come and do working holiday. And so when I wanted to learn the language, in addition to going to like a night school, essentially, all the students and all the people learning Japanese would go to an international bar on a Wednesday, get absolutely toasted with all the local Japanese people. And I'm for anyone who does drink, but both for yourself, Austin, and also for anyone in watching the video, your confidence tends to somehow correlate with the amount of blood alcohol that you have, with your blood alcohol level.
Sounds like if we went and spoke to a Japanese linguist who's an expert in like dialects, they would analyze your Japanese as slurred by the sound of it. It's got a nice like 4 drinks in quality to it.
Exactly, but
it's a great way to learn, though. I mean, that's basically like that's almost a form of like cultural exchange program. Sounds pretty ideal, actually.
It's a pretty apt way to describe it. Definitely, drinking culture in Japan and Australia is not dissimilar. So but that was it. That was the way to learn, and then that was able to open way more doors, especially in the anime world, where English is not as prevalent. I would argue to be able to just start having more creative meetings, more productive meetings, not have to rely so much on either just nodding with deer in headlights, sort of yes, I totally understand, and then just kind of hopefully it works out later. You can actually have like an actual discourse.
Yeah, right.
With the team, which is I think like when you're in a day in day out of it, you don't think about it that much anymore, but definitely grateful that those language skills were done before I had memory. So I can just sort of like you can just do what you got to do now.
Well, so then how did you actually make that leap, though? Because it's one thing to admire it and even go to these steps of learning the language and having constant interactions with folks, like socially. But, obviously it's always a whole other thing to then find yourself in a position where someone can hire you. And then particularly on noteworthy projects, because I really don't know the inner workings of the Japanese, animation industry and how even what the entry points would even look like, especially to an outsider, if I am accurate to label you that way.
No. So the entry points, I still don't know. It just happened. But actually, my entry point though was through games, because I was working on some video games in Japan or from Japan, but one of these people that I worked with was now attached to a Kickstarter anime project that I ended up doing some trailer music for, and then did the score for, and then that was like the point of contact, so to speak.
That kind of kicked things off. Got it.
Yeah, absolutely. And because what came, because especially when I found out about yourself in sort of slightly earlier, like earlier 2010s sort of time. It seemed like you had come quite significantly from film at the time, but did games come first, same time, or was it like literally just kind of
It's funny how they really were concurrent. They always have been. I just delivered a feature 2 weeks ago.
Oh, amazing.
And so they've always gone side by side. The difference is that you have a higher possibility of having heard of the games I've worked on. I've worked on lots and lots of independent films that no one's ever seen. So I've actually done more films than games. It's probably going to be another few years before those numbers finally switch. Because there was a period of time, you're absolutely right, where I was definitely doing a lot more films. Also, it's easier to do more films than games logistically, right, because you're very often working on a game for several years at a time. And usually, on a good year, like I think on my most productive years, I did like maybe 8 or 9 features in a year, because, they're 6-7 weeks each, sometimes also overlapping. So, that's really not that hard. But in contrast, a game that's like Pathless that came out last year was, well, 3.5 years, I think. So it's like there's one credit. You could do 10, you could do 20 movies in that time, theoretically.
100%. Well, my question was then going to be like, do you feel like maybe slowed down is not the right, like, it might sound slightly too like loaded, but do you feel like you could do that much music now? Or do you feel like you probably take more time purely because like maybe things are bigger in terms of scale, or maybe like maybe there's a lifestyle element that maybe wasn't there before, where you could like smash out 8-9 feature films a year because you're not maybe, well, I mean, pandemic aside, maybe you're not traveling as much, maybe you're not, for example, I know you do live performance now a lot more as well, obviously that
absolutely
a consideration. I was just curious, like, also maybe just your craft has changed and you take longer to write music.
It's funny. I do think I possibly do work slightly slower than I used to, because it's like if I sit down to write a piece for strings and I'm 21, I've not done that much. In high school I did it, but it's just the very nature of it is very novel. So it's kind of like this adrenaline of excitement as you do something you've never done.
Exactly.
And then at 31, it's like, okay, I've written for strings a lot. So how do I do it in a way that's not the same as all these other ways I've done it? So I find that it just naturally takes longer as a byproduct of trying to
gotta weed out more shit.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, it's funny that you phrase it that way, because I always tell people that I'm not actually a very good composer. 99% of what I write is quite horrible, but I'm pretty good at like figuring out what of the 1% I wrote is decent. So I'm a decent enough curator, but I have to create mountains of garbage in the process. And it definitely does not walk away. You don't walk away from that with the impression of, oh, aren't I this brilliant artist? You're like, good God, I had to put a lot of shit on the table before one little scrap of something decent came out of it. And
so this is very interesting, because basically the way that I've, if I'm trying not to be too negative about it, the way that I've kind of described how my writing process has changed is that there's more filtrations that need to happen to basically weed out what I would now consider not of quality, because
like standards have gone up and you're sort of, I think I can totally relate to that. I would say that's I've never thought of it quite that way, that it's almost like there's more filtering happening, and there's it's almost like when water filters talk about how they have multiple stages and then it moves into the carbon particles.
Can we use that analogy as well?
Yeah, like well, you planted it in, you inceptioned it into my brain. But it makes sense. It's a total, like you end up with, as your craft develops, just as a natural byproduct of using that muscle, you end up with more tools with which to filter. You see things like before, something that might have gotten through the filter now won't. And, it becomes that much more arduous to make something.
Less places to hide. And then also I think probably increased pressure potentially. And the reason I use the word pressure, like the the meaning behind the word pressure for me would probably be, especially with the projects, with more and more projects happening as one's career probably like develops. There's going to be those occasional like real gems where you're like, okay, I really want to do something super crazy with this. They've come to you to say, okay, we know you, we know your works, we know your history.
Right.
We want you to do something that is never comparable in terms of style to what you may have done in the past, but you're either trying to, there may be an occasion where you want to either be as impactful as a score that was already maybe successful in the past, or you want to potentially even try and just do what you would consider a better compositional score for yourself, and trying the pressure of getting something both right for yourself as a creative, but then also making sure that it's still right for the project, the game, whatever it may be. I don't know, that's what I mean by potential pressure, especially as things start progressing, because there's more to compare to, or there's more to reference to, or more to acknowledge with your creative past.
It's funny. This is a big part. I first off, yes, 100%. And I think this is part of why I really try to just lean in and embrace not repeating myself as much as I possibly can. Even I sometimes I wonder if in some way that's kind of detrimental to my career in some sense, because like when Journey came out, it caused such a kind of reaction, and I found myself on the receiving end of phone calls and opportunities and things like that, that were very different than prior to when Journey came out. And obviously it's like essentially the most amazing thing I feel insanely lucky to have been beneficiary to, because
but there are growing pains.
Well, and so yeah, it's like my career, I kind of in a way was at a crossroad where the question was, okay, a whole bunch of people suddenly see me as like the Journey guy, as opposed to have no clue who I am. And so do I like lean into that and capitalize on that by sort of writing a bunch more music that sounds a lot like Journey and really kind of solidify? And some people have done this, and I don't mean it disparagingly, but like I would look to a composer like Oliver Arnolds, who or Max Richter, where the vast majority of their music is really stylistically considered, or Philip Glass is almost the prototypical example, right? Of somebody who the music, it's sometimes almost indifferentiable from one piece to another, never mind like staying in the same swimming pool. Yes. And I really don't mean that to sound like a backhanded sort of statement. Like it really, I think that's someone who very comfortably owns sort of, forgive the kind of corporate lingo, but their brand. And so that's a laudable way to go. And I've had composers, Thomas Newman is a good example of somebody who really owned their brand for a long time, but then as their career just flourished and he became so known for like that Thomas Newman thing, then other opportunities came along that let him stretch away from that, not least of which James Bond movies and stuff. Right. So like,
this is, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. No, sorry. This is, I completely understand and agree. So this is interesting because the way I would react to that is to say the idea of while being maybe not untrue to yourself as a creative, you're still potentially you slip quite not naturally, but you slip quite successfully into different swimming pools, if you will, different styles and whatnot. But at the same time, it's not losing the I guess your this is going to sound cheesy, so you're losing your soul, something like that. The reason, I like the Thomas Newman example because I was watching your You Gotta Hear This with where you were talking about the Wally track, but then Miss Troy Baker also was like, oh, I still hear a little bit of that Shawshank from like 20 years ago. But at the same time, while it's not in any arguable way. Sonically similar, just that maybe the style of writing, the way that I mean, you were mentioning the chords in the video, just the way that they shift together or away from each other.
All those intangible qualities. Yeah, this is why I love, this is why my kind of king of kings is Jerry Goldsmith, because he could always be himself. While the analogy that I like to use to really kind of make it clear what the difference is between the surface level sort of compositional gestures versus that soul or that voice or that personality that lies below that is I say, some people, when you see them, they're like I'm suddenly blanking on his name, Steve Jobs. He always very famously always wore the same exact outfit, right? Like he had his black turtleneck, and that's his thing. And
not many people pull off a turtleneck, in my opinion. By the way,
yeah, certainly. And so it's like the guy underneath the clothes is consistent, but the clothes are also consistent. And you could say, like, by way of analogy, that's Philip Glass. What I love about Goldsmith is that he could pull off like 1,000 outfits, but underneath the clothing, the man was always still Jerry Goldsmith. And that to me was the distinct, because it's really easy. The first time I ever sat down and said, okay, well, I want to write, like, I want to find ways to incorporate, fill in the blank. Like, I come from a very kind of orchestral background. So it's like, okay, I want to play around with maybe like a gospel vibe in this, or it would be wonderful if there's kind of a mid 20th century like Stockhausen infection in this, or whatever, like whatever it is, something that feels inherently outside of my default position, which of course is its own discussion because I try to have none of those, but if admitting that there are certain things that just come really easily to me and could like that kind of orchestral palette. And so the first time you sit down to deliberately sort of inject something novel into that, it's really easy in an attempt to authentically represent that thing to stop writing and like following your own instincts into being yourself. And I actually, here's a practical, a good example of that is when almost 10 years ago, I scored the remake or reboot or whatever of Leisure Suit Larry. And it was like, let's do a 18-piece big band, like classic. And so, there's real traditions in the world of big band, and there's all these different schools within it. There's certain people,
and also people from that world will fucking know in a second if you're faking it or not.
Yeah, they are some of the most discerning listeners you can imagine.
You used to try it? That's cute.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. root position. What is this fucking amateur hour? Yeah. So that's the but I loved that. So it's one of those where the first part of that, I thought, okay, I want to authentically absorb what makes big band. I'm studying charts. I'm going to a lot of concerts. There was a local big band that I wanted to record it with, and they did shows that gigged around town a lot. So I'd go hear them. And I have another friend who has his own big band, and I would go and I'd look at their charts and all that. And then at some point though, I just said, if I treat these as, assembly instructions, like some IKEA furniture, I will actually not be writing music anymore. And so I just said, you know what? My voicings are going to be weird. There's going to be things I don't actually want it. Yeah, I don't want it to be mistakable for somebody else in a way. I'll just trust that I'm, doing what I want to do. And of course, there were definitely moments during the recording session where, I'd see the trumpet, like principal trumpet, look over to principal saxophone player and give each other a look like, well, that was a weird way to voice that chord or whatever. Yeah, but I would embrace it.
You gotta look at that point. Also, if you're in the recording session already, you've already kind of committed.
You're well past the point.
Yeah. It's like this train's driving itself by this point. But no, but I mean, okay, that kind of leads me into something that I really wanted to ask you, which was to do with how you decide on your musical building blocks, and I'm talking like interactivity or something like that, but just purely like when you just look at the project for the first time, whether it be Leisure Suit, oh my god, Leisure Suit Larry, or whether it be Journey or Pathless, and those two I was particularly interested in. I did a little like compare and contrast leading up to this, if that's okay to say. But I was kind of curious how you decided what instruments or what maybe styles or what core sort of musical personalities were appropriate for both the project and then like the specific parts of the project. And I guess just to kind of contextualize the question, the idea of harp, bass flute, and voice in Journey, for example, at the end with the ending song, I Was Born for This. But then also, for example, in the Pathless, where you have the three main sections, the three main areas, so to speak, and you have,
The
for example,
on the island.
The plateaus. Yeah, sorry. But just the idea of, okay, well, here's going to be double bass. Here's going to be bamboo flutes, and oh no, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking.
The oud was the third one. Yeah,
it was. Yeah, sorry. For some reason, I thought the oud was like the through tone on something. But no, like I was just
very. Well, so forgive me that I'm going to completely dodge that for a second, because I really, really want to not fully abandon the subject that the big band stuff was a part of, because I have that same question for you. And okay. Forgive me that I'm just fully kind of doing this for a moment. No. But I asked because specifically the world of anime and by extension, you know, a lot of the Japanese video game industry, you know, obviously kind of enshrined by the massive, deep legacy of 10,000 JRPGs, but far beyond even just that sort of subgenre. There are some real stylistic flavors that, you know, you can really quickly spot. There's something very, I've been fascinated by this as soon as I discovered it as a young kid. I was playing my first Nintendo games essentially, and subsequent, you know, beyond PlayStation and PC games, where every time I played a game from Japan, I always felt, at least if it was a Japanese composer, which is 99% of the time, I always thought it's so fascinating how so much of the Western worlds of all these different pop genres, and especially like R&B and hip hop and jazz, have been absorbed in with this orchestral sensibility. And it kind of, the alchemy of it became a genre that's so distinct that even though a bunch of different composers have their own take on it, it's usually very transparently obvious. And I'm just fascinated for somebody coming in who obviously, you know, you have a great love of all this culturally and artistically, creatively, all that. To the extent that you were asking, you know, about, you know, sort of putting something on versus it being just this reflection of your innermost self.
Extension of yourself.
Yeah, and I'm specific. Like, I'm curious to just hear you unpack kind of anything in that general area. But I'm also curious if there's ever been. This is a very ignorant question on my part, so I just feel free to just.
Sure, you know, it's all good.
Kick my ass. But I'm just curious. I'm curious to what extent there's like a stylistic directive to conscientiously be like that. If you are stepping in as essentially a non-Japanese composer, is there ever a sense of, you know, here's how we do it in this playground? Please, you know, dial your various faders accordingly, or is it just Kevin does Kevin, and you're incidentally, you know, that's in your blood already anyway because it's been part of your whole life. Is my question too fragmented?
No, I got an answer.
Okay, I'm excited because I genuinely, I've wondered this about you for years, and I just haven't had occasion to ask until now.
Sure thing. So I would argue, and again, feel free to disagree, I would argue that most young composers, regardless of country of origin, go through what I've kind of referred to, I guess, as an imitation phase, where, you know, sure. Love these composers, want to be exactly like these composers, want to have the exact same life as these composers, want to write like these composers, blah, blah, blah.
Bach would literally write Vivaldi charts to learn.
Exactly. So just learning through imitating, maybe not consciously, but like learning via imitation, I think is incredibly useful. I think it's very good, and I wouldn't discourage it at all. with any young composer who's learning. Just at some point, that imitation approach, consciously or subconsciously, hopefully, maybe a good teacher will just be like, okay, you're doing this a lot now. Let's switch it up. But the idea that whatever is like kind of fresh ink, so to speak, in terms of inspiration, eventually kind of just like gets sunk into the page a little bit. And it just becomes maybe like a couple of those elements of your favorite composer who you've been wanting to be like for all those young years. Maybe a few of those personality threads sort of become your own internally, but then you kind of move on and you kind of expand your horizons creatively. And eventually doing that enough might become what could be argued a personal style or a personal
your thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's a well-absorbed and thoroughly digested amalgamation of other composers. But it doesn't sound a bit too grim about it. But
no, but it's true. I mean, everybody. I mean, the saying is always, "We all stand on the shoulders of giants," and I think that that you're articulating that for sure. So you're in other words, you're sorry. Continue.
No. Oh, sorry. It's okay.
Yeah, please.
The reason I brought that up was to do with the fact that for me, when I was young, all of these people, or the extreme vast majority, were Japanese video game composers. So I want to write like Uematsu, I want to write like Joe Hisaishi for the Ghibli movies, all those sorts of things. That was prevalent, super prevalent in the early work. And it's still, there's occasionally the old yep, still a fan, a little nod here and there. But that once absorbed enough, along with like exposure to other things such as Ryuichi Sakamoto, or exposure to Arvo Pärt, or Steve Reich, or something like that, John Adams, etc. That started those absorbed or sort of studied or imitated materials started blending, so to speak, and thus became whatever the fuck is happening now. But
so does that mean that the other part of my question, where if you're working on an anime film, and there's a certain sense of how those ought to sound, that you're just naturally going to do that. You don't need somebody pointing you that way, because it's just baked into your blood. Or would they even ask for it?
No, well, this is the thing. There's never been any overt request. I mean, that we have obviously the standard creative discussions of the creative briefs that anyone would for any type of project. However, and especially more nowadays, but even at the start, there's not an assumption of precedent. So when you're, it can be, I mean, like the flip side of that being the onus is on you to now not fuck it up, and you got to come up with some bitchin' concept that hopefully doesn't, sound.
I'd rather be in that position than be told, here's the 5 things I want you to just kind of imitate. So one's more scary, but the other.
Yeah. Sometimes a little bit of that guidance is great, but like for example, like Maiden Abyss is sort of like the that was like the first time I felt like I was doing something that was actually genuine to how I wanted to write music moving forward, and it was to do with like the core approach of it, because even though there was no stylistic guidance, the reason that that soundtrack became what it was to do with the fact that I really liked the idea and the style of trying to make musical parameters based off visual stimulus. So the very, very quick breakdown, Maiden Abyss is basically about some very, very young, small characters going into a big cave system to explore. So little characters, big space. And so the idea that could then potentially become a musical parameter, like small amount of chamber musicians recorded in a giant room fit for about like 100 plus people, that could be used now as a compositional idea. So those sorts of things would never be suggested and because they won't say like, oh, we really want it to be Irish or something like that. You know, we don't want. They're not going to say like we insist on tin whistle or something like that. Although that has happened once, but it was guitar. But like generally speaking, they're more like, we want to hear what you think. Hopefully, it's good. And then you kind of just present, your concept album, so to speak. And if you get your thumbs up, then some structures start coming into place. We need I'm sure we're all very familiar with Google Sheets by now, but we all get a nice big cue list where it's like, okay, so M1 main theme, M2 main theme dark version, M3 main theme happy version. So there'll be
that's interesting. That sounds almost like that's actually not how I've typically worked. That sounds like is that because it's just anticipating a lot of future music editorial work, and you're not doing all bespoke top to bottom.
It's not synced TV music at all, unless there's a specific scene.
Is that normal? Is that normal? Why is that? I mean, because I wouldn't think it would be unfeasible, right? I mean, it certainly it's made to work in the US.
No, of course. I mean, look, there's a couple of reasons why I think it probably exists like that. One is probably to do with control a little bit. Having basically a custom library music album, multiple CDs worth, depending on the size of the show, can be quite useful when having to do things so quickly.
Of course,
in Japan. So there's probably many practical reasons for it. I mean, there could be some financial reason as well why commissioning bespoke music for 24 episodes of anime that need to be done on a very, very, very specific deadline as well, it would be impractical. And there's, I mean, movie anime is still done to picture that, and then I did an OVA, which is essentially an original video animation. Think of it sort of like a mini series, or even like a pilot episode or pilot series of something that would be larger down the track. So original video animation. So I did one of those recently called Eden, which was 4 episodes long, animated, but that was scored to picture because it was shorter and was way more specific. However, things like a 12, 13, or 24 episode series, essentially you're just writing music based off your impressions, and someone else thinks it. You don't pick the spots. So you just sat there like, oh, okay, well, they just used that track, which I had no intention of using for that scene. But there we go. Here we are.
Funny. I remember once asking a composer friend of mine who had been doing a network TV show for 10 years. And I asked him a similar question, and he said the way that it worked these days was, he'll write a few pieces of like the big moments in the show, but because he has 10 years worth of, like what is 150 episodes worth of cues, pretty much every conceivable emotional up and rise and fall and tempos and all the rest. He's basically built this gigantic library and said, he'll write a cue, and if they have feedback on it, they don't even tell him. They just go find another one that they like. And so at some point it's kind of autopiloting, but it's still starting from a basic premise of bespoke scoring with spotting sessions and all the rest of it.
No.
Wow, that's fascinating. I did not know. I mean, of course it makes total sense. And
movies being the exception, of course, but even the movies, sometimes you're dictated the spotting. Or you're suggested, they say, but they use cuts. They don't use time codes as much as you would think, but they use cut numbers because it's all animated. So they'll say like from cut 3 to cut 24, we want this style of music. And then from cut 25 to 36, we wanted to change into that. So they'll kind of dictate. I mean, there's obviously negotiation. There's obviously sometimes you can be in the room when they do that. But it is a very formalized process, actually.
I've only worked that way a handful of times. And it, to me, I say again?
Did you like it?
I don't mind it, although it is very different than what I'm used to. I really like to your question that I sidestepped about, how to build those initial blocks on a game like Pathless or whatever. None of those decisions are arrived at as just staring at the game and then saying, here's my pitch. But it's this, because it's 3+ years of working, on Slack every day, in-person meetings, down at their studio. I mean, obviously that's not really happening right now, but for, 2/3 of that project before the pandemic started, we, or maybe half it, whatever it was, I would go down every few weeks, once a month at minimum, to their office, and we'd sit for several hours. We'd play through the build. I always had my notebook full of scratchings, and we would like draw maps and say, now, if we put a region here, but then we put a buffer so that if the player moves in and then backs out and doesn't go, we don't actually trigger, transitions. And we would really get into it. And so, sometimes 1 minute of music would take 6 months to write, because there's so much discussion around what it ought to be. And of course, I'd also make mock-ups and say, what do you think of this instrument? Like at one point on Pathless, I was really heavily featuring marimba, and that I always got pushback on it until eventually I just got rid of it, because it was like, it feels somehow silly. I would get the note that like that the plunky quality is running counter to what I think it ought to be doing here. And that would be the feedback, that sort of thing.
That's why I wanted to know, because there's such a fucking eclectic collection of instruments that, whether it be instruments and voices from Mongolia paired with a fucking double bass and like a bass clarinet at times, of course, with the fourth plateau, and then obviously our good friend Kristen Nagus slaying it on basically everything, playing to freaking bass kazoo.
I mean, honestly, that was too fun. That was that.
I got my kazoo right here.
Probably better. You're probably better at it than I was at her bass kazoo, but that, honestly, the funny thing is the way that started is that it started with the throat singers. I knew that and I also had fallen in love with this Swedish instrument called the nyckelharpa. And so that created this implication of a kind of global sensibility. And then very quickly just kind of spiderwebbed, where I thought, okay, well, the more deliberately kind of polycultural influences I add, the more it doesn't read as, oh, well, it's Western music with a sprinkle of tuba throat singer, or it's tuba throat singing with a sprinkle of Western orchestra. But it's like, the more I put in, the more genuinely potpourri-ish it became, which is what I wanted. I didn't want it to feel like it was anchored in any one particular thing, although I did kind of accept that if it is anchored in any one particular thing, I wouldn't mind if it read that the tuba musicians were truly kind of the heart and soul, because I really did start with them and let everything kind of react to that. But in some cases, so much paint got added that it really was that big blend. And because it's really difficult, if something is supposed to feel like folk music, there are no non-existent cultural folk music traditions. Like, all folk music traditions are clearly where they're from. And so you're making a statement whether you want to or not if you invoke any kind of folk idiom. And that was the thing I was trying to avoid. How do I kind of invent a culture without doing something that sounds so detached from the human experience that it's very obviously artificial?
100%. And like that, I mean, you said my answer there, but like the follow-up to that was, how do you not fuck up someone else's culture?
Yeah, well, that was the big.
I want to be that guy.
Yeah, that was the same. I didn't want to just kind of superficially sprinkle a thing on there and go, okay, yeah, now it's this, or throw an instrument in there and just say, because I'm using this instrument now, it must be that thing. And it's like composers using taiko drums and saying, oh, well, I guess I've got a flavor of Japan in there now, and it's like, come on, that's a really shallow take.
Exactly. Well, I mean, this is because there's pressure again, like, and there needs to be, in my opinion, a huge amount of acknowledgement understanding is a bit of a weird word to use, but I mean, maybe appreciation. There needs to be an acknowledgement, maybe, that you're potentially as a guest coming into this culture and working with someone who's happy to work with you, but it shouldn't be potentially a dictation of, oh, well, I imagined you to sound like this, which is why, like, oh, sorry, I was only saying. So when I saw you jamming with the Mongolian musicians, I think you recorded in DC. If my memory is good from.
Yeah, you are correct. Although they are from Tuva, not Mongolia, but yes.
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
They're very close. They're very closely related, but it's Tuva's like this much smaller country that's sort of sandwiched in between Mongolia and the southern edge of Russia, and it's actually weird. Like, it's surprising how different in some ways. I imagine I don't know if this is a perfect analogy, but I would imagine in some ways it would be kind of like North versus South Korean musical traditions, where there's enough separation in like purely kind of the historical migration away from each other, and just the separation that the folk idioms are actually noticeably different, but they have a huge amount in common, this shared DNA, right. You know, that I would think it's. But yes, no, that's my fuck up. That's my fuck up. But like, everybody, yeah, I know everybody.
No. But the reason I want, because I saw the video, and when you were saying I would rather just jam with them and see what they do and just capture that, rather than specifically or strictly dictate what I need. You allowed them to just kind of do what they did, while also, of course, providing the parameters that a composer must.
Yeah, it was a learning process, because I did initially, I wanted to see to what extent I could write for them as performers, like as almost not session musicians, but I thought, if I write a piece and then they want to perform it, how does that work? And because they're phenomenal musicians, it's not for lack of ability to do that. But I really didn't like what I got when I tried it. I just thought, okay, well, let's do a little test session. They were in New York, and I just booked a little studio for like an hour just to kind of see how it goes. And they were, totally down to do it and try it.
I'm sure they were like really cool. Like, I'm sure they were awesome people.
They're wonderful guys. Yeah, they really are. And their manager, who kind of is their translator, he's this guy. It's so funny. He's this brilliant. In a way, his story is sort of reminiscent of you. I can't remember where he's from, but he comes across like such this Venice Beach, California surfer dude, where he's just like, oh, bro, we're going to have a really good session today, aren't we? Like, and he just fell so in love with Tuva that he just moved there, became fluent in the language, and now built his whole life around supporting these guys. Wow. And like being their tour manager and booker, and the guy that can, speak English most comfortably to help them, with opportunities around the world. It's just like this, but it's so funny. If you just met this guy on the street, you wouldn't guess that in a million years. Yeah. And I had a delight working with him, and so the whole thing was really positive from that. But I could still feel, that they were kind of playing like this, and that not only were they not at their most musically creative and powerful, but also it was there were things I didn't even know I was missing, because I haven't lived my whole life in their culture. And there's just a million things that, there's only so much you can learn as an outsider, even if you commit your whole life to studying it, And so that's when I thought, you know what, let's just screw it all. I'm just going to jettison everything. And let's just play together, because then what happens is I can kind of set the table and turn them loose. Yeah. And then there can be this 20-minute window where they just play, and they just fall into those traditions that they've been doing their whole life, but it's sort of leaping from my little, but then what was fun is then I could also, inject some little surprises, and being that they are great musicians, they would react to that. So I was definitely able to be a part of the process and add things that they wouldn't do on their own, but I was very much in their house. They were the referees. They wrote the rules. They were just letting me kind of play with them and bend the rules a little. And that ended up being the magical. I mean, we played for hours and hours and hours, and I didn't want to stop. It's like, the night is getting farther in, and I just thought I could keep going. This is, I want to do this every time.
Exactly. I mean, that's yeah, I mean that it warms my heart to hear that, because like that's so cool, because that in my idea is like a perfect result, because it's like, okay, you came in prepared as best as possible, but then you realize that the people like were just best served by just creating the context in which they could just fucking just nail what they've been doing their entire life, which is really nice.
And it would sound really natural, and you could feel that they, their fingers were fully leveraging all that muscle memory that they've built up while still embracing some curveballs and some fun challenge. And it really, it honestly changed me as a composer, because I'd always been a little bit wary of anything improvisational or non-authored, because I just thought, anybody can sit and jam, but the compositional process should somehow yield more than purely spontaneous in the moment. And I dismissed it as a tool, because it just seemed like that's not what composing is. That's improvising, that's jamming, that's whatever. It's great in a show, in a live show, but somehow I'd gotten it into my head that was somehow not a meaningful way to write music. And it really rewired my brain into going, this is one of the most joyous acts of creating I've ever experienced. How do I incorporate this now into everything going forward somehow or another?
I disagree with past Austin. I agree with current Austin.
Same here. No, that's the thing. I think it's just ego. I think it was, coming out of, it's like I'm always trying to shed the baggage of, earlier years. And I think, I remember I was watching this special with all these comedians sort of doing kind of like what we're doing right now, but about comedy. And one of the guys in the room was Ricky Gervais. And he was saying how it's really important to him that, like, when an audience comes to see him, they see him doing material that only he could do. It's not just funny, but it's specifically a thing that they would never get anywhere else, because he feels like they've turned over their $100 or whatever to see him live. He owes them something that only he could deliver. And if it's a joke anyone else could have thought of, then he has failed. And it should be even more than a joke. It should be a thing that makes them think and sits with them for maybe even years later after the show's over. Like, he touches on real truths to life and to the human condition and all that kind of thing. And I think I had a similar burden I was laying on myself as a composer. Like, I must write something that is this true. It's like, it's a product of authorship. If it just seems to spring out in the moment, I haven't done enough work yet. It must not be right. I think that was a lot of just like this voice of ego that at some point I realized, you're not actually helping. So fuck off.
No, no, I totally look. I totally understand, and like I'm also like I also am very much like not dissimilar to that in terms of I never like just sitting on the first idea, but I guess just like maybe being able to capture those first initial. This is why like I don't like throwing away drafts, because it's not that I think they're particularly good. It's that I might be able to come back to it potentially later and find the potential for an idea, even if it's not that original take. 100%. And so the idea, just I guess in a world of sometimes slightly vast deadlines, never throwing away your drafts can sometimes be a nice little, just reach for the cabinet. Oh, okay. Oh, I did that. That went nowhere. Oh, it could go somewhere now.
Well, and sometimes it just comes out right. A story I often tell is with Journey is, Genova told me the idea of the game, and 30 seconds later, I had the theme. And I never. It's funny because I never questioned it. It's like maybe it was after Journey came out that this sort of voice rose up in my head that says, now maybe that's the thing you were asking about earlier, of now there's this pressure, because I was like, oh great, I've got the idea, and I was all enthusiastic. And then later in subsequent projects over the years evolved into this mode of, well, I don't trust it. It's the first thing I thought of. It must be bad, or it must be shallow or something. And now I'm kind of migrating back towards, saying maybe, maybe.
No, totally. And also, I love being a slightly shit piano player, because sometimes you do the wrong chord and you find a new idea.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. I always leave the red light on, so many times that I've played something, done that, my finger slipped, and I heard this thing, and then I'm like, wait, what was it? And then it's just gone, and it's maddening.
Oh, God bless MIDI recall.
Yeah, for real. Well,
Like,
look, I think we're kind of we're pushing our luck potentially on the runtime, given that this is going to slot into a scheduled event. So we should probably wrap this up. But I didn't shout out that you have been basking in the afterglow of a shiny new anime Star Wars release. So huge congrats. I haven't watched it yet. I was hoping to watch it before this talk, although I'm in a way glad we didn't, because it would have been all I wanted to talk about, I'm certain. So we'll just do another one of these sooner than later. But huge congrats. That is no small feat. And it's, very deserved. And I can't wait to actually finally see it and hear it.
Well, that's an incredibly kind thing for you to say. I really appreciate it. It was the longest project of my life mentally, but as you can imagine. But
on the subject of feeling pressure, I imagine that nothing probably has ever rivaled.
I mean, every question I had as every potential topic of conversation was all about either lifestyle balance, not screwing up someone else's idea, how to actually come up with the idea in the first place, and the pressure to not, to not fuck up in general and to get it right. So everything was a projection based.
Yeah, I could see it. I'm sure you crushed it. It's one of those things that I'm going in with complete and total confidence that I'm going to love it. And I can't wait to unpack it with you. So maybe we have no guidance on how to sign off this thing, but maybe some social media plugs or something so people can come admire you on a more real-time basis.
Sure thing. Well, I'm Kevin Penkin at Twitter, and so if you like complaining about Australian coronavirus lockdown riots, then that's your number one source of catharticism. But
you're the go-to.
And then I know I'm a big fan of YouTube channel, of course, but you've got the YouTubes, you got Twitters.
Yeah, I'm a Wintory everywhere, although there's like a fake a Wintory on Instagram, and which is, it's so stupid because it's very obviously fake, because they made it it's probably some kid who made it as a joke like 8 years ago, and because it hasn't been touched, but I cannot get them to get rid of it. So I'm a .Wintory on.
I was going to say, the I can be replaced by a 1.
I know that would have been probably better, because it feels very unclean to be a Wintory everywhere else. But yes, I appreciate you mentioning the YouTube channel. That's been my pet project the last year and a half. Really good stuff. It's been really fun to find. Anytime a thought occurs to me, like, can that be a video somehow? It's like this constant presence. YouTube is now my salacious crumb. If the hardcore Star Wars fans can track that reference, the voice in my head, to the extent that I am Jabba, and salacious crumb is like the voice asking if YouTube somehow can be rolled into that. And so I sincerely hope that this will end up there at some point soon, after premiering at the Down Under first. I guess that really doesn't matter in the world of the internet. But in any case, dude, what a pleasure. Let's definitely do more of this. I know.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Real pleasure to talk to you. And obviously, it's lovely to break some bread, and hopefully we get to be able to I need more coffee. Hopefully we're able to do it more in the future, both online and hopefully, when the world has stopped being a fucking on fire piece of shit, then in person. That'd be lovely.
Yeah, well, I've got a lot of friends in Melbourne, and I love that city. I've been a couple of times, and I would be more than happy to meet you on your home turf, and we'll clink a glass.
Let's do it. I know a good wine bar. I know several, actually.
Yeah, they see you walk in and they're like, "Oh boy, clear the tables."
Yeah.
I love it.
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly.